G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic weekend. Now I'm going to try and keep this short because I've got to get to a barbecue I'm having as a get together of my mates before I go in for my operation next week and probably some time off YouTube as well. Okay, so look, as always, we do have a lot to go over. What we need to look at is, of course, we need to talk about North Korean and the potential of North Korean soldiers entering the battlefield, what this means, how it may look, and what are sources telling us. We need to look at what the former chief of the military and now ambassador to the UK, Valery Zaluzhnyi, has said about the war and how this lines up with some of the messaging we have seen that's put through the victory plan and how we are reading into this. Also, of course, then we'll look at the maps and we'll look at what Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has said not only about Ukraine's victory plan, but where he sees negotiations as well. But it's something I think is massively underappreciated is potentially how close we are to an end to this war. Now, how an end looks, we have no idea, but the US elections are in 17 days. So how I see this is if we have a Trump victory, which is what the polls and the betting I'm seeing at the moment is saying, then in 17 days we're going to have a real look window through to what the future of this war is. Or potentially, if we see then a Harris victory, we know that there will be potentially multiple years left of war. But one of the things I see with this is, well, Harris is already in power. So will there be some massive shift on aid or support or policy towards Ukraine? Probably not. Very predictable that it will just move in the same sort of trajectory that we have seen. How does the end or how does the continuation of this war look? Well, that is something that we are going to move forwards through time and see. Now, you've probably had a lot of confusion about North Korean troops. We've got sources telling us that North Korean troops have already been killed in Ukraine, that they're fighting. We've got sources saying that they're already deserting off the front line. And now we have intelligence saying that they're just arriving. So what is it? Well, we're going to go off what statements we have and potentially how this will look as well. Like I said, asking for evidence is not ever propaganda. It is not misinformation. It is not disinformation. Asking for evidence is your God-given right, and I'm not religious. But this also may have opened up an opportunity for Russia. And by what I mean is, the Kursk offensive may have actually opened this opportunity for Russia to work with its allies to do this. Back in the 18th, 19th of August, I'm fairly sure I shared this with you, but if not, I share it now, so it's now 2 months ago. Ukrainian invasion of Russia opened up an interesting possibility of using allied troops from North Korea, Iran, or Belarus inside Russia while not using any Russian reserves. And this is very, very interesting. Because if we do see these troops deployed, I believe also that's most likely we'll see them deployed inside of Kursk. Now, in Kursk, we know that's where Russia has the most amount of air superiority and a shitload of support logistically because, well, it's not into occupied territory and tens or hundreds of kilometers to the front line. It is right there. But what does this do if they fight in Kursk? Well, it frees up many more Russian troops and reserves. But more importantly, it will have far less political and diplomatic fallout or problems for Russia because, well, it's using troops as allies within its own territory. And this will likely skirt around many international issues, potential fallouts that could occur of a deployment of forces into an occupied area. That if it was in Kursk, it's in Russian territory, this could be seen very differently. And 2 months ago, one of my sources I had talked to spoke about exactly this happening. But why may it also be Kursk? Well, Kursk is a secondary theatre, a secondary sector for the Russian forces. It's absolutely not their primary sector that they are focusing on. And in the doctrine of attritional protracted warfare, it does suggest to feed trained but non-experienced troops into secondary theatre sectors first to gain experience before moving to your primary sector. but I think it's more that political nature that could take place there. Remember, this is why Russia declared this a terrorist operation, or a terror operation, is so they could bring in different units from within their federal policing and police into here, such as the FSB, rather than a military operation or special military operation within occupied territories. So this is, you need to look outside of just ex-soldier in X area. So let's have a look at this that backs it up. Of course, this is then Budanov, head of the GUR, Ukraine's military intelligence. He is saying that they, by the North Korean troops, will be ready to fight by November the 1st. North Korean troops will be using Russian equipment and ammunition. Said Budanov, the first cadre of 2,600 soldiers will go to Kursk, where Ukraine has established heavily fought over foothold. It is unclear where the remaining North Korean troops will go. We don't have the full picture right now. I think it could potentially be very Kursk heavy. So let's look at the footage we actually have and what South Korean intelligence is saying. Then we'll look at the political and diplomatic concerns of this occurring also. So this is the first footage that I saw come out, was then men here speaking definitely Korean and then collecting what looks to be Russian military equipment. Now, in this, we don't really get much of an idea here, other than guys standing in a line, getting your bags, getting your equipment, but being fitted out here with Russian military equipment. Then we get this video here, which is allegedly showing North Korean troops at a Russian training ground, then saying you're not allowed to film them, but these guys moving around and running around here. Nothing groundbreaking in that footage. But if we look at the location, it was at this base here. Now, this base is in Russia's far east. You don't get much further east than this. And if we do a quick measure, I believe it's about 6,500, about 6,600, taking into account occupied area, to the front lines in Ukraine. And if we come down then into North Korea, it's about 230 kilometers. So significantly closer to North Korea than Ukraine at this point, out of range of any strikes that we have seen so far. But again, showing that these soldiers are still in the far east of the country. I'm yet to see any evidence of any of these soldiers actually within Ukraine, although there are claims they have been killed, deserted, and everything in between. So we need to say that there's two real train of thoughts on this and where this could go for Western support. So the first train of thought is that Russia has escalated, so we need to as well. We need to supply more arms to Ukraine, the existential threat from Russia to Europe, X, Y, and Z. Therefore, because of this, we need more arms, more training, etc. But then there's a second train of thought here of, shit, another country has entered. We don't want to cross the event horizon of one country, then another, and then we spill into an all-out war. And Zelensky has said, as a bit of a warning, that this is closer to a world war now. Korea's potential deployment of troops to fight with the Russians in Ukraine could turn the European conflict into a world war. This is where I see that second train of thought. Well, we don't want a world war. We don't want further expansion of the war. We need to find a negotiated settlement sooner rather than later. And this is where I believe the majority of Republicans are sitting currently. Of course, we know Trump is right at the forefront of that feeling also. And let's speak on that idea of world war further. So we see a Ukrainian page here saying, what on earth is North Korea thinking? Does it want a world war? But I've also pointed out this is the second train of thinking that people are saying. The West won't go into World War III for Ukraine, not with Sullivan and Scholz. And he is correct. We're not going to see the West step into a world war for Ukraine. At the moment, the West won't supply Ukraine with decades-old long-range strikes into Russia, let alone stepping into the West's own soldiers fighting the war for Ukraine. The NATO rhetoric has been that this is an existential threat for NATO. The rhetoric has been that. The actions are significantly different of what we see. And this is where people like Professor Mearsheimer say even if a nuclear bomb was dropped, there's not going to be a strike back on Moscow because the next one is going to be New York and it's all over from there. This is why there is feet dragging from the US, and we need to be realistic about where the Western support starts and stops. Okay, it starts at tanks and F-16s and this and that, but it looks like it has hit a hard stopper at long-range strikes. Long-range strikes are not a 50th of what boots on the ground would be, or strikes against Russia from the US or from NATO aircraft. So what real impact on this war does North Korean forces entering the war have? I don't know. Politically, will there be any major shift to policy? I don't believe so. Could it ask the questions of more weapons, more support? Maybe. Or does it have the opposite effect in, say, the US going, look, there's another country getting involved here. We don't want a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and then us. We need to get out of this. And I believe if we do see a Trump victory, that is very likely where that will sit. And we'll speak about that more in a second. So this is the press release from the NIS, the National Intelligence Service. Remember, if you're in intel services, you need a cool 3-letter name. Whether you're the CIA, FBI, FSB, KGB, NIS. Why is it all 3 letters? Except for Australia, we are ASIS. Either way. The National Intelligence Service announced on the 18th that North Korea began moving special forces for dispatch to Russia on the 8th. Afterwards, the NIS closely monitored the movements of North Korean military and confirmed the start of the North Koreans' military participation in the war by detecting that North Korean transported special forces to Russia via Russian naval transport ship on the 8th to the 13th. According to the NIS, 4 landing ships, 3 escort ships belonging to the Russian Pacific Fleet completed the first transport approximately 1,500 North Korean special forces to the areas in here, to Vladivostok, so still far east. This is the first time that Russian Navy has entered the North Korean waters since 1990. In addition, large transport aircraft such as the An-124 of the Russian Air Force is frequently flying between Vladivostok and Pyongyang. Kim Jong-un inspected the special forces twice prior to the deployment. North Korean soldiers were issued Russian military uniforms and Russian-made weapons, as we have seen, and they're saying they were issued fake ID cards of residents of the Yakutia and Buryatia regions of Siberia who look similar to North Koreans. Remember, you're not allowed to be profiled like that. Either way, on this day, the NIS assessed that North Korea had provided Russia with weapons capable of killing people, included shells, missiles, anti-tank rockets amounting to 13,000 containers on 70 occasions since August. Considering the size of the containers loaded onto cargo ships travelling between North Korea and Russia, it appears that more than 8 million rounds of 122 and 152 shells have been provided to Russia so far. This is a massive, massive amount of shells. Remember, there was the promise of 1 million shells, which I don't believe we got to 60% of. The amount of shells that North Korea has given to Russia is astronomical. Ukrainian intelligence authorities analysed many North Korean weapons have a higher defect rate and low accuracy. So they are being used for mass offensives to maintain the front line rather than for precision strikes. That is very likely true. We also need to remember that in an attritional protracted war, that quantity is a quality of its own. So let's continue on this. So what this is showing is the Russian landing ships transported from North Korea to Russia, moving troops and arms. And here they're saying in Kursk that there is 400 North Korean personnel gathered on a parade ground from satellite imagery. And further here, estimated of 240 people at this base as well. And as well, Kim Jong-un observing then the special warfare training. Now, what level of training will these guys have? Look, we don't know. No one actually knows. Everyone takes the piss, but no one really actually knows how capable or incapable these troops will actually be. But something that we do need to take into account with all warfare and looking at the history of warfare, that one should not necessarily assume that a competitor with little experience in one aspect of warfare is incapable, under the galvanizing pressures of combat, of rapidly overcoming its earlier deficiencies. So in the galvanizing pressure of combat, you can overcome those early deficiencies. Remember, North Korea has little to no combat experience other than if they get trainers in from, say, Russia, which I say would be highly, highly likely. But this is also giving 1,200 to 12,000 troops potential combat experience that can go back and train in the tens to hundreds of thousands. This is exactly what we'll see when this war ends, is Ukrainian forces moved out into all corners of the Western world to train Western forces with experience, because there is no NATO military with conventional combat experience in modern times. So we'll see that happen that way, just like we saw Wagner then train in the VDV, as well as back into Belarus. So yes, this is big news. How much change will it make on the front line? I think it's probably going to be negligible, but it does show the building of partnerships, allies around the world, and I think most likely will be used in Kursk to really skirt around some of those political issues that may occur. So let's have then a look at the maps, and then I want to talk about the victory plan and some messaging that you and I have spoken about. So here is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, the red check area that Russia has made in the last 24 hours, the blue that Ukraine has made over the past 2 weeks, green beyond that 2 weeks, the blue, of course, into Kursk, where we are just speaking about recently. Now, we'll pop down into here, and the first place I want to come is Chasiv Yar front. Now, we did see a Russian flag flown right out around this area yesterday. The grey zone has not moved up to that area, but we do see an advancement out here through Klishkivka, although we do show that other maps that have shown this under control now for a number of weeks. Again, this map is getting highly, highly criticized by everyone of like, it is just not showing geolocated footage. We saw a Russian soldier yesterday on a building putting a flag up. Now, whether that is Russian controlled or not, I'm happy to have speculation on that because it may not be controlled. Is it contested area, aka grey zone? Yeah, if they're present there, yeah. So let's have then a look up in Kursk. Now, this map isn't showing any changes on here, but we do presume there has been some large changes because there are other maps showing them, as well as we have another Suryak map here today in Koronevsky district. Russian army recaptured these localities. So let's have a look actually at this. So this locality right here, this Novovanovka, that it's saying that Russia has captured this, and further just to the west of here, pushing down, putting pressure on Lyubimovka, as you can see, where then these reservoirs are sitting right in here too. So this is important to look at and see where things are changing. Now, the Suja district, which is then out to the east, it is saying that Russian forces recaptured the Raskaya Konopelka and are advancing towards Agronom. So let's have a zoom in, and this is actually Raskaya Konopelka right out here. It was only ever shown in then grey zone, but we do know from other maps it is showing through Ulanok and further towards Suja that there is a lot of Russian pushing. Whether that has been taken back or not is up for question, but we have seen further armoured assaults right into those areas. So let's move down the map just a little bit, and we'll come to where Nevsky is sitting, Terny, Ivanivka on this front. We have one then Suryak map for you. Now we can see this red dot, that is Nevsky. Now let's have a look. These are where the two reservoirs are sitting. We have, of course, then Terny, Ivanivka sitting. We can just have a look, see where these tree lines line up. Through this area here, it is saying that there is a Russian advancement between, I guess, where this Terny axis and Nevsky is closing up. No changes shown on this map today. Let's move then further down, and we see some red here around from Maxim Melanivka, the Hostre front, which is just to the south of course, the Pokrovsk front. Now, this is where these maps are actually similar today. So moving down to this road here, that southwest Donetsk city, following the capture of Maxim Melanivka, the Russian army increased the buffer zone around the locality, pushing down to this road. As we can see, the two maps are lining up today. Now let's move out to Tushkerne front, and then we'll have a look. Seladov Tushkerne front, that is showing some movement. This red dot is Tushkerne, a further westerly push. Due to the presence of Ukrainian army in the farms, the west of the locality is impossible to consider the village is completely secured, but the majority is, of course, building up that flank on Seladov as well. And then we have one that I missed, but we'll come down. It does show to the northwest of Vuhledar, more control being made by the Russians there. So a few axes on here, but again, I think very far behind other maps. Robotny took the best part of 6 months to update, and we know it's been at least a month, say, on areas around Klishkivka as well. Now, Pishani shows no change on the deep state map, but let's look here. Now, just a small update shown on the Suryak, which is just this tree line right here, just to the north of Krylyevka, but moving where this road and these supply lines are going to be between the Oskil and Russian controlled ground and Ukrainian controlled ground at the moment. This is a very important area, and we know it is due to the evacuation of the Ukrainian civilians in these areas, and now the bombing of many areas in Kupiansk and surrounding as well by the Russian forces. So I said right in the beginning that we are either very close or very far from an end to this war, not in between. I believe we're one or the other. And in my opinion, we've seen a vast increase in Ukrainian messaging around the lack of weapons and the lack of will from the West. Yesterday and the day before, we discussed the victory plan, which it completely ignores any internal issues whilst asking for very lofty goals which are currently unobtainable and knowingly unobtainable. And what we spoke about yesterday is, could this be a way to save face in the Ukrainian government if there is a Trump administration victory? To somewhat shift the blame onto the West of, well, we would have won if you had the will and you gave us what was requested. Look, we've got it written down here. If we had this, we would have won, but because of you, we didn't. Therefore, it is on you and not on us. And I believe the timing of this plan, in my opinion, was very crucial. We got the plan unveiled only 3 weeks out. We've got more of this messaging than even today. So it will be in recent memory if there is a Trump administration. And look, let's not act like this plan, although we know for months it was telling us, look, it's being developed, it's going to be unveiled and this and that. Let's not act like this plan took months and months to develop. What the strategy is here that we are referring to in business is called the poison pill. You set unrealistic goal setting, and the idea is to present a goal or target which is intentionally impossible to achieve, knowing that it will fail. The failure then can be used to shift blame onto others, employees, teams, external stakeholders. So we've presented, well, we want this, even if we know that NATO invitation from the US is just saying, look, at this point in time, no, you know it is unobtainable at this point, unrealistic target setting. So then if it doesn't get achieved, or if Trump gets in, the blame can be shifted onto external stakeholders. This is why it had no internal accountability changes to be made around manpower, corruption, command, and then democracy, all of which we know there are massive issues within in Ukraine. But that's why further and further, I believe what started as a theory to, hey, that's sort of lining up. Let's look at what Zaluzhnyi has said at then this speech for the Royal Institute of International Affairs. So it gives a list of judgments about the war. My first judgment is important to understand the essence of war in Ukraine, that Ukraine is fighting for its independence for the last 10 years with weapons in hand. The full-scale war has been ongoing for almost 3 years, with more than 30,000 people already perished and hundreds of thousands injured. So we've heard that 30,000 number again. It is likely significantly higher than this. But there is a lot of criticism put into as well over the last 10 years. Well, there should have been more development actions taken from 14 for defensive and offensive operations as well. It can't all be externally shifted. Speaks about the war, that the effect it's having within Ukraine as a nation, as a sovereign state. And these facts make future peaceful coexistence impossible with Russia, and therefore cannot consider any options to stop the war based on intentions of mutual security. My fifth judgment is that I personally believe the reason for what is happening in Ukraine today is the logical consequence of reluctance of the collective West, which first of all declares its democratic values. These are logical consequences of the reluctance of the collective West to influence the global security system. Again, speaking of reluctance here. Also, though, many non-Western speakers, and including some Western speakers, will say, but the Western influence on the global system could be seen as soft imperialism. Hard imperialism, going with a gun and, hey, this fucking Australia's ours. Soft imperialism is leaning on other sovereign states of, well, this is our global security system, this is our world order. If you don't like it, well, then you are one of the second world, third world. You're not going to be us. It's very interesting to read other authors, philosophers, whatever, who will speak about that. But again, the reluctance of the collective West we see here, that these are taking advantage of the weaknesses of the West, and I personally see it, of the United States. So due to the reluctance to influence global security, therefore, it's seen as weakness, and people will take advantage of that. In 2008, Russia began its social expansion, creating a belt of its own security space. Then in 2014, under the silence of the same collective West, Russia started the war against Ukraine. My sixth statement is, in order to keep the West in fear, Putin speaks about red lines and nuclear weapons. Western politicians, often being held hostage by their own voters, repeatedly talk about the need to avoid escalation. This is a simple fact of reality. The question remains, will this war be limited to only Putin's appetites concerning Ukraine? Naturally, the answer should come from Western politicians, and they can be honest in their response to the voters. This is the thing. Nuclear weapons are used every single day as a way to influence, coerce, or anything in between. And of course, if Putin talks about these red lines and nuclear weapons, that has an effect on democratic countries and how the voters may vote and see further expansion and stepping up that escalation ladder as well. And in democratic countries, that obviously affects how people will see the war moving forward and who they will vote into power. This is where this North Korean thing could be a massive win for Russia, is that if Trump gets into power, you've got a third country at war. We know Trump has some level of relationship with Kim Jong-un, that people go, we just don't want more countries getting involved in this war. Let's end it there. But you can see what I'm getting at of shifting some of the blame across onto the West. Again, on the seventh statement, is my personal opinion. Collective West didn't truly believe in Ukraine. That's why the Western press, fearing Putin, initially gave Ukraine 3 hours, 3 days, and eventually came to the edge of Ukraine. That's where the 3-day thing comes from, remember. The collective West, fearing nuclear war escalation, and I say this as the former Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, did not provide Ukraine with the necessary amount of weapons. As a result, in 2023, we failed to achieve any significant advancements in defeating Russia. So that is a large statement right there of what we have seen. I think not only was it a failure to achieve advancement, I actually think the 2023 counteroffensive, or the offensive at the time, actually jeopardized future offensives. Cost billions of dollars, thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives, and jeopardise 24, potential 25 offensives, potential offensive in the future, as I believe Kursk has done also. And consequently, we've entered a state of protracted war. In my opinion, finding a way out of this protracted war seems nearly impossible. Talking about the articles he wrote back in 2023 of what is actually happening. But in 23, we lost the opportunity to independently bring this war to an end. So he's saying here, we lost the opportunity to independently bring it to an end. More now, we need Western support to have a victory in this war. End of 22, beginning of 23, I believe was Ukraine's best chance to have some level of victory on the battlefield. Both appeared to get spoilt by a lot of other issues. Now, we've entered a protracted attritional war with Russia, which I'd say that is exactly what you don't want to do. But from here, we're going to need external support. My eighth judgment is this. It is a fact of reality that concerns all of us present here in this audience and applies to each of you. Please tell me, is it now a secret that China, North Korea, and Iran have united around Russia? Or does anyone believe that these countries have united against Ukraine? If so, let me be the first to disappoint you. Most of these countries don't even know where Ukraine is. If we look carefully at an organisation like BRICS, especially its prospects for expansion, we must ask, what about the collective West? Is it still afraid of escalation? So again, if there is some deal signed, it will be because the West was too afraid of escalation, too afraid of X, Y, and Z. This is why there was a failure or not a victory. Failure and not a victory are different things. Like being innocent and not guilty. Those are different things. But I believe a lot of this is getting shifted. There's no talking about internal issues of command of millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions going missing the years prior, or any realm of other problems that we do know are realistic and could be fixed internally. This is my 9th point, which is an important fact of reality. Whether you want it or not, and whether the weapons manufacturers with contracts worth billions in their hands want it or not, war has changed. Speaks about the experience back from the Korean War of protracted man war and how this is changing in technology as well. It seems that NATO has remained silent and hasn't adapted to changes in global security. Global security continues to be built on expensive weapon systems, including missiles, fighters, and aircraft carriers. However, in massive war, the capacity to produce these systems at scale will diminish, reducing their effectiveness. Unfortunately, the future of global security cannot rely solely on these outdated means. This is a large criticism of the entire West's military industrial complex. And let me just find it in this book here. Right. So the new American way of war, with its intense emphasis on speed and precision firepower, can occasionally appear excessively geared towards fighting wars as if they were battles, and thus risks confusing the winning of campaigns or small-scale actions with the winning of wars. An equal, if not greater degree of attention should therefore be placed on the study of the less operationally absorbing but more deliberate tempo of protracted war, and on prevailing at the end of a draining marathon rather than an intense opening sprint. And speaking also in this about the complexity of systems. If you need to absorb large losses, you cannot have super high level complex systems or tactics, because if you're just replacing guys, you're just not going to be able to have people use those systems or conduct those missions in the length of time that you're going to then need them to. 10th statement, the most important one I want to share with you as a citizen of Ukraine. We have been fighting for our freedom for 10 years. We have not become part of the proposed Russian Union or any group of countries. Our vision of future victory is simple. We need to regain 3 fundamental things. Firstly, speaking about the feeling of Ukraine's own security as an individual, that they need security guarantees. We simply need to join NATO, that there's no alternative to collective security than NATO. This is victory plan point number 1. But again, we know at this point in time that is not possible. This is where we've spoken about. Is it a bit of a poison pill that if Trump gets in and there needs to be a negotiation, the blame can then be shifted? Secondly, we need the feeling of unlimited development opportunities. Every Ukrainian should have the chance to thrive. This depends on post-war recovery process. But will investors be willing to invest in a country where another war could break out at any moment? The truth is they will not. No investor will commit to long-term investment in a country lacking security guarantees. Thus, a sense of development is impossible without ensuring security. There is no long-term prospects for Ukraine without security guarantees. This is one of the problems. We hear about Ukraine's got all this potential for growth of industry and this and that and that. Absolutely is true. What Zaluzhnyi is saying here, that if there is not security guarantees, X company is not going to step in and build this factory, employ these workers, make this system, because then another war could always just be on the horizon and all that absolutely wiped out. And without those guarantees, there is no long-term prospect. And this is why being in NATO for Ukraine is of the utmost importance. But to be there, they need that military victory. And if there is some negotiated process in 17 days or 18 days from this point in time, is that going to be on the table for negotiation? Most likely not. Otherwise, Putin will continue the war. And with the way it is going at the moment, probably a worse negotiator down the line if Kamala gets in and doesn't give massive amounts of weapons or further Western involvement in Ukraine. Like Zaluzhnyi said in here, that we've lost the opportunity to independently bring the war to an end. So, of course, we've presented you the victory plan. We have spoken about what Russia has said as their terms for negotiation before. Let's look at what Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said as well. We're not accept any option for Ukraine to remain in a position when it is used by the West in order to impose direct threats on Russia. The realities on the ground will be considered as the West will advance its concepts, torn between supporting Zelensky and realising the dead-end nature of this line. You see, the victory plan comprises the essence of Zelensky's desires. He wants to win. He wants to play on the fact that the West is still threatening to inflict strategic defeat on Russia on the ground. That is the difference in approach, purely psychological and political. We need to proceed from the fact that everyone well knows Russia's position. Russian President Vladimir Putin outlined it while delivering his speech at the Foreign Ministry this June, speaking about taking into account the realistic nature on the ground, as well as presenting what it sees as a way to walk away from the war. And this was, of course, done on the eve of the Swiss Peace Summit, where Russia wanting to take the oblasts and other agreements into the future around security as well. Of course, the security guarantees are directly the opposite of what Zaluzhnyi speaks about. The Russian foreign minister also recalled the April 22 Istanbul peace deal that proposed to stop hostilities and appease the situation between Russia and Ukraine on the basis of fair security agreements and interests of both Russia and Ukraine. This agreement, supported by our side, was violated by Kiev. And every time another agreement was blown up, undermined or violated by the Ukrainian side. Ukraine lost its territory, and each time it is getting smaller. And this at the end is the hinting of where Russia, or at least through their foreign minister, see an end to the war versus then what Ukraine has said by their victory plan. That our position is clear. No NATO membership, neutral status, solution to the problems of the Russian-speaking population, deprived of the right to do anything in its native language in flagrant violation of the UN Charter and numerous conventions. And the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is being destroyed, also in a violation of the UN Charter and numerous conventions. But also in this, what he doesn't mention is the taking of Crimea and Kherson, Zap, Donetsk, and Luhansk as well. But again, you can see where the two sides are so far apart, and that Russia will continue the war, so there is no NATO membership. Ukraine is saying without NATO membership, on independence, that there's no way there's going to be any rebuilding investment in the future without security guarantees. So the war may continue. It'd be interesting to see, even if Trump gets in, will the war continue? Without US support, it would be, I can't say the S word on this, but a S mission, I believe, because the rest of NATO just has not picked up to the amount to supply Ukraine with what the US can, and the US can alone. So that would be an interesting, if Trump got in and said we're ending the war, Ukraine said we're not doing that because there's no future in that. If we can't join these security measures like NATO, we're going for it anyway. That would be a very interesting piece to see where that leads in the future. Legends, have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.